Well, a very good morning to you. Welcome to the broadcast. You're watching Morning Express on this third day of a new month, which comes at a time when Kenya has just received its first batch of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, which landed in the country just shortly before midnight. We'll definitely inform you about this and much more. I'm not alone.
Ingado, today we take a look at that very big story as Kenya endeavors to inoculate its population. What are the complications? Stakeholders are saying a lot. We have KMPDU saying that these vaccines are still under research and therefore it's not yet time to do that. But of course we have an unrelenting virus. We'll help you understand what inoculation does to a population, what the complications are in terms of governments, and of course the availability of that vaccine and much more. So stay tuned to KTN Morning Express for that and more. Remember, you can be a part of the conversation and even ask your own question by tagging me at Trix Ingado and Jesse is at Jesse Rogers. The hashtag is KTN Morning Express.
Of course, we'll definitely cover that particular issue, covering the health and the fight against COVID-19 in totality. Definitely taking a look at what happened just as that batch arrived at the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. But before we do that, let's take a look at what is emanating from different corners of this particular globe. Let's start with East Africa right now. The Daily Monitor touching on the latest from our neighbors, Uganda. And there we have it. NUP man claims being tortured in a military cell. This is 3 weeks after the January 14th presidential polls, where he was arrested, detained and questioned for his connection to NUP leader Robert Changulanyi. That is the latest from the Daily Monitor. Even as girls fall to pandemic pregnancies as schools reopen, and experts are blaming it on poverty and peer pressure. Let's cross over to the Citizen then. Dar es Salaam is the latest right there. The port cargo handling projected to rise by 43% in 4 years. The volume of cargo handled at the Dar es Salaam port is projected to rise during the next 4 years when the ongoing berths expansion is completed. Make sure you you're duly informed about what's happening in our neighboring Tanzania. Over to Rwanda right now. Let's take a look at what's happening in that particular country. Debt, new directive heap pressure on waste collectors, even as the regulator wants companies collecting garbage in Kigali to expand their fleet in order to boost capacity to handle waste appropriately. Over to the East Africa, let's take a look at what stories have been covered there just briefly. UN delays AMISOM exit from Somalia, and that extension of stay comes as Somalia's political leaders seek to break an impasse that has delayed elections, causing anxiety. That seems to be one of the stories covered on the East African, even as Somalia opposition accuses Farmajo of sidelining it again, bearing in mind the turmoil that we've seen around the election, as the Council of Presidential Candidates accused the president of sabotaging the talks between the prime minister and the opposition. Over to CNN World News. Let's take a look at some of the stories highlighted right here on their page. Even as we wait for it to load, let's just take a look at one of the stories right there. Satellite images reveal North Korea took recent steps to conceal nuclear weapons site. This is interesting, bearing in mind the deal that signed with the previous U.S. president, and we'll definitely continue monitoring some of these stories. As we can see, hundreds of Nigerian schoolgirls have been released days after kidnapping. That's definitely good news, even as sensitization, and many were actually urging for the release of this particular schoolgirls who were kidnapped from the school just a few days ago. Some of the stories right there highlighted in the dailies in terms of world news. We'll definitely keep you updated on that and much more. All right, let's take a look at some of the stories that might be highlighted in the papers. But before we do that, it's also proper to note that Kenyans can now breathe a sigh of relief after over 1 million doses of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine had arrived in the country late last night. The arrival of these vaccines will be given to health workers and other frontline workers, and it actually marks a shift in the battle against COVID-19 right here in the country, even as the country saw a surge in numbers just yesterday. Now, speaking while receiving the vaccines, the Health Cabinet Secretary who was present, Mutahi Kagwe, urged Kenyans to continue observing the COVID-19 regulations and even reiterated the government's commitment to providing vaccines to more Kenyans in the coming months. Take a look.
This is a fantastic moment. We are all very excited about this particular event, receiving the vaccine for the first time in our country. We've been fighting COVID-19, we've been fighting this virus, but we have been fighting it with rubber bullets. But this time round, what we have received here is the equivalent, metaphorically speaking, to acquisition of machine guns, bazookas, and tanks to fight this war against COVID-19. We want to thank our partners, UNICEF, the World Health Organization, and we want to say that this achievement is as a result of a lot of hard work on a lot of people in the Ministry of Health, in our partners, in our bilateral partners as well. We want to say that we are very, very grateful for the hard work that the workers in the Ministry of Health are continuing to do. Dr. Willie Zakwale, Dr. Amoth, Dr. Kuria, and all those people who are working hard to ensure that this vaccine not only arrives in Kenya, but can get to the people who so rightly deserve it. So tomorrow, as soon as these vaccines leave here, they are going straight to Kitengela, where we have got very good storage facilities. And from tomorrow, I will take you around on Thursday. On Thursday, I'll take you around, those in the media who may wish to see where we are storing these vaccines. We will take you down to Kitengela so that you can see how well it has been organized. And from there on, it will roll out to the rest of the country, beginning with the regional hospitals, down to the level 4s, level 3s, and level 2 hospitals. And we will also be engaging the private sector institutions, the hospitals, so that they can also assist in the process of vaccination. So we are very excited and we are very happy. It's a very happy moment for Kenya, and we hope that the media can also help us in disseminating information. We will roll out a risk communication system so that Kenyans can understand. They can ask the questions they want to ask, and they will get the answers thereof. So for us, it's an exciting moment. Thank you all so much, members of the Fourth Estate. Thank you for standing with us. Thank you for being there when we needed you. But the war is not over. We are in the middle of the pandemic. That is why we have got the vaccines here. So we would like to continue on this fight, and we want you to continue with the support that you have given us. So thank you all so much. Thank you very much. We really appreciate what we are seeing here. Dr. Rudy Eggers from the World Health Organization. And there will be more for us to say tomorrow and the next days. But for now, let's just tell Kenyans it's an exciting moment and we are really happy. The war has changed. This is a game changer for the war against COVID-19.
We are talking about saving lives. So when we say we have received 1.25 million vaccines, it means that you are saving lives as much. And so me as a Kenyan, first of all, I must congratulate this team for this historic moment. In the Ministry of Transport, we would like to support the Ministry of Health in terms of transport and logistics. As you are aware, these COVID vaccines are coming from overseas. Questions have been asked as to what role is Kenya Airways playing in terms of bringing these vaccines here. What I can say is this: KQ initially did not have a certification by UNICEF. They had to go through some audit process, and as you are aware, we converted 1787 to become what they call the freighters. Passenger plane converted to become freighters. And so now with that, we have gone through an audit with UNICEF. We have signed an MOU. And so I believe going forward, you're going to see Kenya Airways bringing these vaccines in the future.
Well, it has been termed as a game changer on the war against COVID-19 at that particular batch of Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine arriving in the country shortly after midnight. Of course, our team was there just to bring you up to speed with the latest developments. But be that as it may, the first batch of 495,000 doses will be distributed to regional depots, and the second batch will contain 525,000 doses of the COVID-19 vaccine. Even as the Cabinet Secretary for Health right there urged the media to play a part in engaging the public and informing the public on this particular issue, many have criticized, especially those within the health circles, have criticized the process due to lack of adequate stakeholder involvement and public education on the importance and safety of this particular vaccine. We'd like to begin on that particular note because it has been covered extensively in the papers, The Standard on page 2 and Daily Nation on page 10. And let me allow me to introduce our panelists at this particular point. Kevin Osido is joining us from Nakuru via way of Zoom. He's a governance expert. Many thanks for your time and good morning. Also joining us from our city center studios, Eunice Lumalas, who's an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. Many thanks for your time and good morning. I'd like to begin on that particular note. I'll start with you, Kevin Osido. It has been termed as a game changer right now in this fight against COVID-19. It has been a long wait, but it's finally here. I'd like to begin with your quick reaction to this as we build up on the logistical challenges up ahead.
Thank you so much, Jesse. Of importance is to indicate the commitment of the Kenyan government to secure and safeguard the lives of Kenyans. And I think beyond that is also to underscore the kind of preparedness that the government has been able to put in place, albeit the challenges, which I think should have really made it a fundamental point of engagement, particularly with major stakeholders. And I remember that a few days ago when the CS indicated the arrival of the vaccines, he said that part of the people who will be among the primary populace will be the medical fraternity. And so it would be very, very important for us to look at how the government has considered the health personnel a key population to be inoculated at the first onset, even as we look at the regional, the number of vaccines that have been highlighted to be sent to other parts of the country. Lastly, I think public participation is of utmost importance, and government will have to ensure that it really comes up with very effective and proper ways to engage with citizens, particularly when it comes to public communication mechanisms. Our government has not done that very effectively. We can be able to share as many examples and processes that where we have seen government failing citizens, particularly when it comes to information. And so I think that Kenyans really have come to understand that the government is committed to this process, but I think we must bring, government will have to ensure that they bring citizens closer to processes and also to opportunities where citizens would be able to feel that their government has put them at the forefront. I don't think that from a communication perspective, we have been able to do that effectively. Just
Okay, that's proper to note. Eunice Lumalas, what's your take on this, even as I want to get your reaction on this batch of COVID-19 jabs landing in the country, but even as you give us your take, what's your thought on the rollout of this particular jabs, which will definitely target those who are at the frontline, health workers, etc.? What's your take on this?
I think to start with, I would say that one of the things that we must learn from COVID is that governments must learn to rely on themselves. Okay? We form governments for the reason that they protect us, they look after our health, and therefore seeing the election of the minister and Mr. Kagwe upon receipt of the COVID vaccines, it's good, you know. However, when you look at the papers and what has been captured and the general air, you know, in terms of medical practitioners and the diverse views, you find that there was no enough stakeholder engagement on the safety of this COVID vaccine. So if I find, for example, that medical practitioners themselves are not very confident about this COVID vaccine, you can imagine how that ripple effect is to ordinary citizens, okay? But we have the assurance of experts that it is a good move and it is here to help particularly the most vulnerable members of our society. So it's a good thing, but we have to remember that our Constitution calls upon us and the government to ensure that we have enough participation of stakeholders before taking a decision. And that would be useful to ensure that there is an air of confidence in this vaccine. I would like to see and hear doctors and frontline workers being confident about this vaccine, and that would enable me to talk to my mother, for example, and others, and encourage them to take up the vaccine. So the rollout is, as explained by the minister, seems to be well managed and regulated, starting with those who are dealing with the most vulnerable members of our society, and then rolling out after that. So I think maybe my comments are limited to that.
All right. That's really proper. And it's proper that you brought to the fore a couple of issues that have been highlighted by the healthcare workers who have definitely faulted the government due to lack or wanting level of engagement from the government on this particular vaccine. So we have healthcare workers, some of them pointing fingers due to lack of adequate stakeholder involvement and public education on this particular issue, which might contribute to a little bit of hesitancy amongst the members of the public. Kevin Osido, what's your take on this, on the level of engagement, especially since the healthcare workers who are supposed to be at the forefront in distributing this particular jabs are questioning their level of engagement in this particular issue? Talk to us about this.
COVID-19 hit Kenya March 14th last year. We have seen, in my view, a deliberate desire to disengage the health practitioners. And I think especially when it comes to dealing with such a pandemic, a global pandemic, it would be quite unfair for us to consider engaging with the citizens before we even have an opportunity to ensure that we effectively engage those who sit at the forefront. And so in some ways of looking at it from a governance perspective, it might be said that it's not easy to engage everyone, particularly when it comes to organized communities. But health sector workers are actually organized in a manner in which you can be able to effectively engage them to have their input in processes. So for example, if you have Kenya Medical Practitioners Dentists Union complaining around how government has ensured that they, one, bring in COVID-19 vaccine into Kenya and then plan for its rollout, I think that's such a fundamental issue that government must consider it an opportunity to therefore engage with the frontline healthcare workers. You talk about nurses, they are also organized. You talk about various clinicians within the health sector. They have an organization, they have a union, they have associations, for which in my view it would be fundamental for government to consider having proper engagements with them. And it is because when you look at the manner in which Kenyans also consider intaking or rather engaging in certain processes, they look at people who really matter, the people who sit at the forefront. And so even if we look at, for example, 23,000 healthcare workers having been selected to be part of the pilot scheme, Kenyans will be asking, what is their way of looking at it? How are they uptaking and intaking the virus inoculation process? Do they consider it something that then Kenyans would want to be part and parcel of? So I think that government, even as I agree with my co-panelist, Lumasa, that governments will have to rely on themselves. I think it's fundamental for the Kenyan government to look at the most at-risk populations and have a consideration on how we engage with them. Because I think it would be very, very fundamental for us to begin from a process where we ask ourselves, what do our people think about how government is taking action on certain processes? And I think for COVID-19 in Kenya, many things have been said, including how we procure PPEs for healthcare workers, including who are the beneficiaries, including procurement, corruption issues that are related to how we ensure that the frontline workers are actually being treated or mistreated. And when the CS talks about Kenya having now brought in a bazooka, when we consider having artillery that has now been brought to the forefront, but yet the people who are going to be considered as the frontline users of this artillery are not part of the process, then what are we saying? I think it therefore should be an opportunity for the Ministry of Health and all the other stakeholders that are at the forefront of this particular COVID-19 process in the Republic of Kenya to have proper public stakeholder engagement. And that will also be able to deal with attitude issues, Jesse. It will be able to deal with public communication concerns. I think it will also, to a greater extent, motivate as many Kenyans to consider even having opportunities to want to go and participate in the virus inoculation process. Jesse.
Okay, well noted, Osido. Even as we regard something that has been covered on the dailies, the governors are sort of throwing spanner to the works, saying they were not involved in the development of the vaccination protocols, yet health is a devolved function. Allow me to bring into the conversation Bunyasi Sakwa, who's joining us from Nambale. He's the Nambale Member of Parliament. Many thanks for your time and good morning, sir. Even as you catch up on this particular conversation, it would be proper to note that trust, developing trust in the COVID-19 vaccine will be a critical point going forward in terms of the distribution of this particular vaccine. Many questions are arising that might need to be answered even as we distribute, from the safety of this vaccine, from the efficacy levels. We've seen figures of around 75 to 92% efficacy on the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. What's your take on this, Bunyasi Sakwa?
Thank you, Jesse. Sorry, I was late to come online, some communication issues.
No problem.
First and foremost, on the issue of the vaccine distribution and logistics, this is a complex operation, and we have had the advantage, Kenya's had the advantage of knowing how other countries are struggling with just how to do it right, to get the vaccines where they are needed, to whoever they are needed, but also to get a national consensus that the preferences they have put in there are acceptable and there is a buy-in. And I think that maybe not enough of that has been done. And it's not just a matter that should be done only by the experts, the public needs to have confidence. That's important. The second thing is there are two levels of effectiveness. One is how well it works as an averaged effectiveness. And I think the AstraZeneca vaccine was one of the highest, but none of it is 100%. But there is also the second area that even if it was 100% effective, the degree to which you are protected by the nature of the scientific content of the vaccine is limited. As you know, they say even if you're vaccinated, you still are liable to get it. Even if you have been sick, you're still liable to get it. So it's really a confidence booster more than anything else. So I think that our people, as they expect the vaccine, should have that awareness. It's only one little booster, but the safety is still in what we do in our protocols.
Okay, that's keen to note, even as it's proper to note as well that you'll still be required to wear your mask and still adhere to the guidelines even after getting this particular vaccine. As we put this matter to end, because it will be discussed later on in totality, a health expert will be joining us right here in studio. Eunice Lumalas, perhaps give us your final take on this particular issue. We've talked about the engagement, but trust will definitely be a key issue. What's your take on this, even as medics might be giving their sentiments that they hadn't been involved adequately? What's your take as it's rolled out to the masses? What make you of this?
Sometimes when the train has left the station, it has left the station, and it's here with us. So COVID vaccine is here. COVID is a global problem. We have to now open our minds and ensure that we are in touch with what is happening everywhere else in the world. Healthcare and frontline workers, they're the ones to come in contact with the most vulnerable people, and therefore their protection is key. So that if we are choosing frontline workers, nurses for this vaccine, it is for that reason. Concerns about its efficacy, its effectiveness, go back to what I had earlier stated. COVID has shown that we must, as a nation, invest in ourselves. We need to now put in structures that ensure more funds and funding is put towards things like research, into healthcare, and also elevating healthcare workers to a position where they feel they are very important, because we all know it's always one health crisis after another, a strike after the other. And even as you've well captured in your papers, some of the frontline workers are not involved in the task force, the COVID task force. So it's important to give people a sense of participation, a sense of ownership of the process, so that they can give the rest of us confidence. I've said this before, but also government and government policy must be directed at proper funding for healthcare and research in healthcare.
Let's cross over to matters still touching on the health sector. The Public Investments Committee has had investigations ongoing into the KEMS scandal. The probe has been ongoing, and just yesterday, Kevin Osido, we saw a lady, as highlighted on page 8 of the Standard, who bagged a tender worth 42 million and told members of parliament that she got that deal through prayers. I mean, this is good news, definitely, for people with faith, who hold on to faith. But as we continue probing this particular issue, I mean, a proxy issue has definitely come up. What's your take on this, even as we attribute the coming of the vaccines in the country? We can't forget the past, right?
Said this before, but also government policy must be directed at proper funding for
Osido, can you hear me?
Research.
Let's go over to matters still.
All right, apologies for that. Allow me to bring into the conversation Sakwa Bunyasi, perhaps being closer to Parliament, he might be privy to a little bit of more information. Bunyasi Sakwa, what's your take on the scenes we've seen as the Public Investments Committee continues with its probe around the Kenya Medical Supplies Authority COVID-19 items that were procured early on last year? What's your take on this?
good news.
These hearings in Parliament and the committees
But as we continue probing this particular issue, I made the proxy issue has put a take on this, even as we attribute the coming of.
All right, let's take a short break. We seem to have a small issue. Even as we try and sort that out, we'll continue with the dailies, so do stay with us for that and much more.